Never in recent times has leadership been put to the test the way it has been during the past year. Suddenly, managers found themselves not only facing unprecedented business conditions, but they also needed to work with teams that were now working from home. Navigating these challenging circumstances was the perfect opportunity for executives to develop new leadership skills, to learn fast, take risks, and test boundaries without the fear of failure. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Each week, I sit down with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, educators, and authors who share their expertise, insights, and vision for the future. Who better to speak with now as we head into the next phase of the pandemic era than Colin Hunter, CEO of Potential Squared, which specializes in using virtual reality technology to help leaders reveal and learn from their true behaviors and habits. Colin is set to release the much-anticipated Be More Wrong, How Failure Makes You an Outstanding Leader, which uncovers the systems, habits, and practices executives need in order to develop critical leadership skills and learn fast. It brings together multiple concepts, including the hero's journey, design thinking methodology, storytelling, personal resilience, psychological safety, strategic presence, and the blended skills of coaching and mentoring into a leadership framework. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that will be bestsellers both online and offline, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarn and knitwear. The fair offers a carefully curated selection of high-quality yarns and knitwear that's bursting with creativity, not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. And be sure to check out A Seat at the Table's website. You can find all of the podcast episodes, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now, let's sit down with Colin and find out why failure is a good thing. Colin, thanks so much for joining me on A Seat at the Table. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights on how leadership can be more resilient in the face of the many unprecedented challenges that organizations are facing right now.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, love the questions and love the thoughts. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to digging in.
One of the newest challenges is managing remote teams. So we'll start with that because that might be sort of at the top of what many people are looking at right now, because as we're in a sense reopening, there's this big controversy about whether or not we're going to still be working remotely, or whether companies are going to bring people back to offices, or most likely some kind of a hybrid situation. In your opinion, how can leadership manage this effectively?
I think it's an interesting time for leadership, because if I was to take us back 18 months, I would have said, never in the world we will have anything but face-to-face leadership development. The best leadership development is face-to-face. And actually, the only way to lead people is to look them in the eyes and be present and spend time and walk the floor. Now, put us on 18 months, I've actually had to shift my opinions in there, because there's a number of things that have come up for different types of leaders and the different types of people that report to them. And therefore, I've become more hopeful as I've gone through that this might be a fundamental good shift for leadership out of what has been a very difficult crisis. So a couple of things in there. One is that what we've seen is our scores in training and development have gone up from the face-to-face to the virtual. And we put it down to a couple of things. One is that the ability for people to be at home, to be, for example, for introverted people to be at home, to be on a screen, allows them to speak up when they want to, but not be intimidated by being in a classroom with other people and listening to the person who talks the most or acts the most. So I think that's one thing. And that's also a lot of the times where leaders have got that piece as well, where they're getting the fact that they're getting more people to amplify their voices virtually than they have before, because they feel safe. The only thing they need to worry about is their voice. Yeah? So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing for me is that if you take the fact that quite a few people have been working from home, there are downsides. So, young parents with young children working at home, doing all the hours, trying to teach their kids in the background. That has been hell for most people. But for other people, the commute is gone. The time they spend on their own social and physical well-being has been huge. So I'm one of those people. I traveled all the time. My body has recovered in the last 18 months in terms of not traveling. So I miss it. I want to get back to it. But physically, emotionally, and mentally, I think we've raised the stakes. I think if I had a third thing, Jane, I think the other thing in terms of leaders and organizations operating positively, because we've taken away some of the senses from people, the ability to command and control in an office, people have had to use different, be innovative about the way they think and they create with people. So some of the platforms, the online platforms, collaboration platforms like Miro that we use, Slack, have allowed different forms of communication to come back in or raise their profile. And one of the simple things for me is I've started using the phone again. So rather than going on a video conference, I've started picking up and dialing the phone to my COO at the end of every day. And just having that audio use at the end of the day has caused me to appreciate, firstly, different senses, being able to see, being able to hear, but also missing the hug, missing that bit to actually connect and physically connect with people has made me appreciate even more. Whereas I used to be walking into the office and go, it's another day in the office. Now I'm walking into the office and thinking, if it's hybrid, for example, and I go one day a week, that's my day to connect. So there's a sense it becomes less of a commodity and more of a precious thing to connect with people. So as you can tell, my mind has spun round to be much more positive. And a lot of our organizations that we work with have spun around to be more positive, to see this as an opportunity for connecting with their people more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think that everyone is wrestling with the pros and cons of working remotely. As you pointed out, the advantage of not having to commute versus the disadvantages of having to try and do your work if you've got other family members around. Taking this a bit deeper, when you're facing rapidly changing, volatile, global and virtual world, how do you feel leadership can build a culture of innovation and resilience while amplifying the voices and capabilities of their team?
So I think this is, again, another opportunity. So if I look at it, I discovered design thinking about 3 years ago, and we partner with IDEO, largest design agency in the globe, and we work with them through a Canadian company to do design thinking for our organizations. And if you think about innovation, it is, for me, about almost leaving your ego and expertise at the door. And it's starting to get and put the user or the user of any product you have at the center of your world. And therefore, innovation is about going out and listening and observing and creating insights to the customers you want to serve in the end. And to do that, you've actually got to suppress a lot of the things in the past that people would have, which is I have knowledge. So if I know how to create a product, I think I know the fashion market. Therefore, I'm going to put the message out there that this is my knowledge. But with design thinking and in complex markets, the fact that all organizations need to get closer to the user, closer to the client, has meant that they're spending more time with the customer. They're almost engaging with them in a more empathic way in what they do. And also, I think that the market has become much more for innovation, has been much more of a, let's get almost an ugly product to market quickly. Let's test it,
Yeah.
And very quickly get feedback on it. Now, as a person who grew up with my mother saying, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Right.
I was ingrained with getting a perfect product out there. Now I can put an ugly product out there and get quick feedback on it. It's the same with leaders and individuals, though. If you think about it, to create a playground where people can go out and explore different ways of operating, different service levels, even for some of the top luxury hotels, they've been playing with service. They've been doing things for charity. They've raised their brand in a crisis situation by opening their doors to homeless people. They've been raising their brand by doing service to the community. So there's a spirit in here in any crisis or any change as volatile as this. By creating a culture of experimentation, we've actually learned over the last 18 months, 12 months or 18 months, to find a different way of operating, which is the future. That's the way that most organizations will learn and grow, is to create that. So that's the innovation part, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. So it's really challenged us to rethink what we held as the way things have to be.
Yeah, agreed. Exactly. And then you think about the job and the role there, Jane, and you think, okay, hold on a second. So the job and the role is what I used to think as my role has changed massively as well. So as a leader, this performance management system, we set objectives. Now we're starting to create, rather than objectives, we're creating systems of experimentation with our teams. And by doing that, people are experimenting and they're becoming what we would call anti-fragile. So Nicholas Taleb wrote in his book, Anti-Fragile.
Right.
It's learning that ability to thrive. And even the Center for Resilience, I saw a presentation recently. They've changed their definition of resilience to be the ability to thrive in chaos.
Interesting.
In uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got. So how do we train and develop and create playgrounds for people to be more resilient, anti-fragile? So there's a massive opportunity we've had for 12 to 18 months in difficult times to start to practice that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you mentioned design thinking. Could you explain that a bit?
Yeah, design thinking it's human-centric innovation. So that's the way they describe it. So let me give you an example, and it's a really, really good story around GE and medical systems. And they had a problem with GE medical systems where MRIs, and I'm just about to go for one myself, but children with MRIs and CAT scans, they had a need to sedate up to about 80% of children going through CAT scans. So they called an IDEO who practiced design thinking to do that. Now, the classic thing would get a bunch of people who are knowledgeable in a room, they come up with a product to try sort it. But design thinking is saying, okay, let's put an extreme user concept. So let's take the extreme users of that challenge. So with GE Medical Systems, IDEO went out and they looked at the sick kids and they looked at the healthy children. And they went and observed them in their real environment, their homes. And by doing that, they were able to get an observation of what was going on in their lives. Now, what they realized by observing the bedrooms alone of the sick kids is they had no pictures of Disney parks. They had no pictures of celebrations or rosettes or awards. All they had was nothing. So it was almost their insight was they'd had their life sucked out of them.
Mm.
And they used an analogous situation, which is design thinking. That was the insight. The analogous situation was of the theme parks where the other kids had gone to theme parks and enjoyed themselves. So they said, how can we create this sense of joy and fun and life back into the sick kids? So for the CAT scans, to go back to the original problem, they created them to be designed like pirate ships. So they had different themes.
Oh, interesting.
So when you went in, this CAT scan was a pirate ship. And the people who were serving you were dressed up as pirates. And the kids got to dress up as their favorite pirates. Or it could be something else, another theme that they went through. Now, they went from about 80+% needing to be sedated to go through it to down below the 10%, 8% being it. But they'd used human-centric observation to gain insights, to do product, and therefore ideas. They'd tested it, and they'd found a solution they never would have unless they'd gone out and gone into the market to explore it. Yeah.
Wow, that's fabulous. And it's interesting to see that they took, such an out of the box, for using a very overused expression, but it's an uncommon approach. And it very easily solved a problem that otherwise could have been a terribly stressful situation for these kids.
But that user center, right at the center of their problem, allows them to think in a different way rather than from ivory towers on their product design. That's design thinking.
I think that's a really good point, is that not being in an ivory tower, which is, I think, a mistake that many, many companies make, which is sort of a top-down approach to product development and marketing. So I think what you're pointing to, which is customer-centric, you can see that in the products, in the brands that are successful. That's the approach that they're taking.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's fun as well. I mean, I love it. I love the fact that you're going out and testing yourself and observing people in the real world. And if you can do it with your own customers, which we're doing at the moment, even better, because you're failing with them. You're failing ugly to start with. You're learning fast, and you're being successful together, which I never thought we'd have a contract of failure with our clients. But if you can do it in a learn fast way, it's great. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Silicon Valley approach of fail fast, right? Minimum viable product, fail fast, pivot.
Yeah, exactly. Or as Ozan Varol, who wrote a book about think like a rocket scientist. He is actually a rocket scientist, ex-rocket scientist. He talked about how you learn fast.
Right.
So he's not a big fan of failure, but he talks about how do you learn fast? And that's the same principle. Pixar do it with their movies. It's a great, but it's tough. It takes a resilient person to be in that space and be successful. Yeah. So that's the other bit that we need to develop.
Yeah, very much so. It's easier said than done. In your writings, you suggest that leaders should bring their own type of quirky, flawed, natural personality and energy rather than following that stereotypical model. What do you see as the advantages of this?
I think it's a simple one from my story. So if I look back at my story, I spent all my time trying to be somebody I was not. And from the first part of my career up to 30, and I actually, unfortunately, had a breakdown when I was 29, 30, but it taught me a lesson because I was wasting so much energy trying to be, firstly, an accountant, then trying to be a farmer, sales rep and marketing person. And I hadn't found where I had my sweet spot. And I was lucky in some ways that I had that failure, that traumatic event in my life, that I was able to just look at myself and discover I spent so much energy being somebody I wasn't, that wouldn't it be easier just to be yourself? Imagine if rather than getting to the door of the office, you go, okay, I'm putting my game face on, I'm going to be the person that I need to be today, and I'm going to wear my suit and tie. You arrive going, yeah, so I've got all my energy today to be myself, to work on something I'm passionate and purposeful about. And therefore, I'm not wasting any energy. I flow through it, and flow is a key part of it. So that's why we talk about, don't waste your energy, be yourself, but find yourself. And if you're in the wrong role, go find the right role that allows you to be yourself. That's the key thing.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think that so many people are trapped in roles that they feel they have to occupy, and perhaps they don't.
I love it. I've got an Australian friend who gave me the expression. He said, do people own their roles or rent them?
Oh, that's good.
And if you think about, what do you do with a rental house? Most of the time, you're waiting till you own something so you can do it up.
Right.
And most of the time, as a renter, you're going, landlord, landlady, come and sort my house out for me. And the principle for the ownership is you love and care. You really cared whether the foundations are right, the paint works right. So the analogy about how do you get somebody to own their role, we're lucky we live in an era where the younger generations are coming through and believing it's their right to be passionate and have purpose. And they're driving the leaders above them to go, so I need to create this space for them. That's the ownership piece, which I love. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because I think what you've touched on there is really certainly what I'm seeing, which is that the younger generation is carving its own path and doesn't feel obliged to get on the corporate ladder, to follow a certain predetermined pathway of success being defined in only one set of criteria. I think that also carries over, like you said, into being yourself. You mentioned that there are 3 dimensions that every leader must have: confidence, conviction, and connection. Can you explain a little bit about each of these?
Yeah, the 3 C's are, and if you can think about an overlapping Venn diagram, impact is at the center. So to have impact as a leader or as an individual, you need to have confidence, conviction, connection. So confidence is the physicality and the vocality. So I've spent probably the last 15, 20 years being coached by an amazing lady called Jacqueline Farrington, who's based on the West Coast of the US, ex-actress. She's also a professor of communication. And she gave me this view about the physicality, vocality of gravitas and prominence, and how you dial up and dial down the physicality and the vocality to speak with confidence. But it's about people will follow people with confidence. So I tell a story on a regular basis of getting off an airplane. I think it might have been Hong Kong, actually. And I didn't know where I was going, but there's a gentleman who walked off in front of us, and about 10 of us followed him because he was walking with confidence. And we thought he knew where he went. And it was only when he turned off to the restroom that we realized that we didn't really need to follow him that way. But if you think about that confidence, it could be seen as arrogance in certain circumstances, right. But people follow confidence. Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's the C of confidence is a key one. So that's why we balance it with conviction. So conviction is the values you hold, and therefore why you do something. So Simon Sinek's work about, people don't follow what you do or how you do it, they follow why you do it. So this purpose, these values behind how you. So when I say my purpose as an organization is to create playgrounds to disrupt the way people are led, then people get what I'm going to do, and they think, oh, hold on a second, I might hang around this person because it might be fun to do that. Or creating heroes of the people I work with. People get that there's something in it for them. So conviction is about some values that we'll give to some other people in there. And confidence and conviction give you a very strong, combination of how you could deliver. So that's conviction, the values and how you bring yourself to that. The final bit, though, is connection. And this, if in any, is the most important bit that I do most of my coaching and work with organizations and leaders on, which is how am I agile in the moment to deal with what's coming? So no plan survives first contact with the enemy. You've got to be prepared for your spontaneity session. The last 12 months has showed us that. So that connection is this ability to be in the moment, listening, present, almost picking up on the onset of circumstances in a room, a meeting with clients, with engagement, restlessly hearing, what's going on in other people's voices and thoughts, and using that to change and be agile in how you do it. So confidence, physicality, vocality, conviction, values, why you show up and what you do, and then connection, which is this agile moment. And it's about working out, what's almost your graphic equalizer about where you sit as a leader in that concept. Yeah.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it. And I think that, it is quite an important way to rethink what we're doing.
Yeah, no. And you can I'm sure your listeners are probably thinking about leaders they've seen before who might do confidence, without conviction and without connection, or do conviction but don't have the confidence to carry it off,
right.
Or do connection but never get anything done because they don't have a purpose or a confidence to do it. So it's almost a measurement of our systems and how we are as a leader. That's what we work on.
That's so true. When you point it out like that, and it does really force you to think about it, and you start to see examples where that is really the case.
I would agree. And I have a hypothesis that I'm working on probably till the day I die, Jane, which is that I believe introverts make the best leaders. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because I think most people would tag onto the confidence piece as the physicality, vocality, almost the jazz hands, tap dancing leader up front.
Right.
And my belief is that confidence comes as the person who's silent in a room, who holds the space, who is the last person to ask the question in the meeting, but everybody's waiting for that person to ask the question. So we shouldn't mistake confidence and these 3 C's as the ability to hold a stage. It is also the ability to hold silence, wisdom, listen, engage others, and use the full dynamics of your brain, your thought, your knowledge, your wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because oftentimes you do see the one who's the loudest or the showiest, right, as being the most confident, but that might not actually be true confidence.
Yeah. There's a few people who would say that about me, Jane, over time. For the first 10 years, he was a lot of hot air. And that's really when I restructured the business in 2007. I realized that in some ways we weren't practicing what we preached. So to be more wrong, I had to go out and explore a different way of doing it. And that's what we did. Now, are we perfect? No, because it's a lifelong journey. It's an infinite game, not a finite game, as Simon Sinek would say. Yeah.
Right. You touched upon the word playground for leaders. What exactly is a playground in your definition?
So a playground for me is somewhere where it's safe. So if you take the original analogy that came in my head, a playground was a place when you're at school, and I wasn't a big fan of school, but the playground was a place to let off steam. It was a place to go out and play, whether it was chatting, socializing, playing a sport, whatever it was, or whether it was just catching up on the gossip and building friendships. And a playground was supervised. So there was a safe place to it at school. Now, for some people who were, for example, sadly bullied at school, it might not have a good connotation. So we started to think it's a place where people feel comfortable to have a go at something different. And that could be a playground nowadays for somebody to go off and walk in the hills. One of my passions is going walking in the hills and just losing myself in nature and going off. It could be a hike in Hong Kong where you are and heading off to a trek across there. But it could be the sea, it could be the ocean. It could be sailing off and doing that. But in business terms, it's very rare that we create playgrounds for people to explore and have a go at things differently. So, say, for example, we started to use professional actors to do this. We started to think this thing, which is how do we create a forum theater, or if you can think about it, the famous comedy show, Whose Line Is It Anyway, where the comedians interact with the audience to take on jokes and themes. We said, how do we get a way of creating a forum theater where the audience plays with the two actors to work on different ways they could have conversations? So how do we create that as a playground? And therefore, you could have 10 people with 10 different views about how to handle a coaching conversation or a client conversation. But we give them the chance with the actors who are trained to give a proportionate pushback or change to their behavior to what's being done there. And we get a remote control in the audience, imagine a remote control where they can stop, they can start, they can rewind with the actor, they can have a go at something, go, no, that was wrong. Can I just rewind, have another go? And so we played with playgrounds to do that internally. And we've done it with businesses, luxury business hotels, to how they deal with their guests, through to large consulting firms where they've created $2 million businesses on the back of some different ideas that they've created, through different conversations. Or design thinking is another way you can create a playground to explore new ideas. So we've used the playground to think about how can I release the tension and expectation and get people to have some fun and fall out of their own thinking to create new ways of doing things. And that's what we started.
Oh, that's really interesting. Just one last question, and this might just be a follow-on to what you were explaining just now. How are you and Potential Squared using the cutting-edge immersive technology of virtual reality, real actors, and measurable data to help reveal and learn, and help leaders reveal and learn from their behaviors and from their habits?
Yeah, we were lucky that we've been using actors for 15 years, something now, and we were realizing that people were going into that scenario, and whether they were going through a 4 or 5 day program where they had a case study. So they'd have a case study and they would meet, for example, they'd meet the COO, the chief operating officer of an organization first, played by an actor, and they had to gather data and handle that conversation. They then had to go on and they had to go and deal with some tough conversations with a few other people. And then they potentially might go to a CEO conversation or a board conversation at the end. The use of the actors was to bring to life a real scenario for them where they weren't arguing, well, this doesn't feel real to me. Most training courses, they might role play with a friend next to them.
Yeah.
But the use of the actors was, this feels like the real conversation I would have. And it's research-based, it's data-based. So by the end of it, they would remember the character's name, not the actor's name. They would remember the character's name. To the point with British Airports Authority and Heathrow, they got to the point where they were running something with us for customer service. They tried to recruit one of the actors who'd gone through it because he was so good at his role that they thought he would be great to role. So that feeling of immersion, we've now taken into the virtual reality space, where if you put the headset on, there is an experience they go through. 4 people will have the headsets on, and they have to, as a 4, collaborate to save themselves from a crisis. And when they do that, the amazing thing about VR and immersion in that reality is you can't help but be yourself. I screwed up 6 times doing this experience, but it was great because I was screwing up in the way that I knew was me.
Right.
We had this brilliant example where 2 clients were doing this. We were watching, and as we were watching them do it, we realized that one of them had been talking over the other, and they both know each other. And this other person turned around and said, well, you stop talking over me. And this other person said, oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. Yes, you are. And then there was this pause, and you do it all the time. And it was that moment where they suddenly realized that they had been themselves because they had nothing else. They were totally cut off in emotion. So how do you hothouse people to get to their true behaviors? There's now scientific proof that this experience that we've got and the actors will be able to measure the baseline of behaviors, attitudes, mindset. And then we can work to coach people to develop people out very quickly to a different set of behaviors. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that for inclusion, diversity, microaggressions in this world, the treatment of gender? Mm-hmm. So we're looking at that, and that's leadership is one area. We're looking at it in the inclusion and that work as well to say, so how do we do it? But Other industries are using it for hotels, fire, crisis, where you're so immersed that you start to see true behaviors, decision making, how they are in the moment, and they can learn very, very quickly in that scenario.
That's so interesting. Colin, there's so much to unpack in everything that you've worked on, between what you've written, all the work you've been doing with Potential Squared. I'm going to definitely put the links to everything in the show notes because I know people will want to connect with you. It's just been a pleasure to hear such a refreshing and new way of looking at things.
Thank you, Jane. It's been good to talk with you.
Thanks again for joining me on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, educators, and authors who share their insights, experiences, and future vision for business. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, if you're looking for a concise view of key shifts, opportunities, and risks in global sourcing, then check out the current situation in sourcing. You can find a link in the show notes. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, plus lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.